Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We've had this discussion about dark money, and my colleagues have pointed out there's a lot more dark money on the left than the right. What I find interesting is that if you take the assumption that disclosure is, and I think the Chairman used the sunlight is the best disinfectant, then we should simply have all political money be disclosed, where it comes from, and the citizens can decide on what impact that has. And we have legislation like that the Chairman has sponsored. We voted on it 3 times. And I would invite my colleagues across the aisle to join us in ending dark money on both sides. It's quite interesting that if, in fact, there's more dark money on the left, that it's only one side of the aisle that wants to end dark money. That sounds like a pretty principled position to me in betterment of the integrity of our campaign system. Now, Dr. Oreskes, my understanding is that Exxon worked with public relations firms to have strategies like saying it's committed to the depth and breadth of climate solutions, that it wanted to reframe itself as an energy company rather than a gasoline or fossil fuel company, that increased its favorability by 10%, that it put forward that it's strongly aligned with Paris, all of which is a way of saying, hey, folks, don't pay attention to our massive fossil fuel undertaking. We're somehow a good guy. Is this the basic strategy of Exxon and other major fossil fuel companies?
Yes, it is, and it's what we've sometimes referred to as misdirection, to try to distract attention away from the basic facts into some distracting issue. So it is true that ExxonMobil, Chevron, and other companies, other oil and gas companies, have sometimes spent small amounts of money on renewable energy. Most estimates show that it's less than 2%. But in their advertisements, for example, they're often very much focused on renewable energy, even though 98% of their commitment is the continued development of oil and gas. And we know from the work that's been done by the IPCC and others, the IPCC and scientists have introduced the notion of a carbon budget. It's the idea that there's a certain amount of oil and gas that we can use without essentially derailing the planetary climate. But nearly all of these groups, including the IMF, by the way, have said, and the International Energy Agency, that this would require not developing new resources of oil and gas. We can use a fair amount of what's still existing, but not searching for new oil and gas. And yet ExxonMobil, Chevron, and all of the major oil and gas companies are continuing to explore for and develop new oil and gas reserves that will commit us to burning fossil fuels for 50 years.
I want to turn to that carbon budget idea. The idea is this is how much we can burn before we hit 1.5 degrees, and we're already here, pretty close to it. But there's some space left. But the last analysis I saw said that the amount of carbon already in kind of the affirmed assets of petroleum companies is 200% more than what will take us from here to 1.5 degrees, and it's 40% more than what would take us to 2 degrees. In other words, if we bring out of the ground everything that has already been identified in the reserves, we shoot past 1.5, we shoot past 2 degrees. Is that a fairly accurate presentation?
Yes, that's correct. That's correct.
And if we keep developing new sources, then essentially what we're doing is we're committing ourselves to a path of warming that goes on for the generations to come to be much more than 1.5 or 2 or even 3 degrees. I come from a state that's burning up with forest fires. We've lost our average snowpack by 20 feet over 90 years, and it's kind of a striking decade-by-decade drop analysis. Our farmers are really hurting as a result of loss of groundwater, which isn't recharged as fast, less spring melt-off, so there's less water, less rain, severe drought. And so I know that for many of my colleagues that say, well, these are speculative studies about what will happen, 50 years from now or something, but the farming, the fishing, and the forestry are being severely impacted in my state right now, just in my lifetime, really within the last 20 years. And so how urgent is it that we really have to get past the kind of the greenwashing or the political messages and act now?
Well, I think it's absolutely urgent, and as I think we've already said today, we've lost 30 years. I mean, President Bush signed the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change in 1992, and that's a long time. If we had started working seriously on this problem at that time, we could have developed many of the large-scale energy infrastructures for solar, for wind, for storage, for demand response pricing, many of these solutions that we know work.
And if the U.S. keeps doing new fossil projects, doesn't that essentially give the rest of the world a free pass to say, hey, you already burned much of the carbon budget that has been burned already. Why should we stop our coal or our fossil methane gas or our oil if the U.S. is still doing new infrastructure?
Well, exactly, and that's exactly what China and India are saying.